So good morning everyone. Today I am going to share with you lessons on change management, and I'm sure by now most of you are very familiar with different models of change management. You know, the ADKAR model, the Kotter's 8-step model, the switch model by Dan and Chip Heath. But what I'm going to share with you is something different. I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, I will help you change the way you think about change management. I have led several transformations in my career, and each time I lead a transformation, I take a step back to understand and see what more could I learn to be more effective. I have also been a keen leader, a keen student of leadership, and I've often gone back to history to learn about leadership, what are the qualities of a good leader, what are the lessons of leadership. So about 3-4 years ago, when I was embarking on a transformation, I said, why don't I go back to history and see if I can get some lessons of change management from history. So what I'm going to share with you today is nuggets of wisdom that I have derived from history. These are nuggets of wisdom that I've got from leaders who have driven huge transformations. These are leaders who have actually transformed nations. And some of these transformations have been so impactful that the echoes of these transformations have reverberated across the globe. So let's get going. But before we go ahead, let us try and understand, when we talk about leading change, what do we really mean? When we're talking about leading change, we're essentially trying to change three things. We are trying to change the way people work, we are trying to change the way people behave, and we are trying to change the way people think. So let's just take an example. Suppose there's an organization which is huge, stable, successful, profitable, and this organization decides it now wants to become more innovative and nimble. What will the organization do first? The first thing it's trying to go and do is change the way its employees work. So it may reorganize itself, it may create skunk work teams, pilot teams, encourage these teams to be innovative with new products and services. It may introduce tools and systems to help employees across the organization to ideate and collaborate with each other. It may create systems to enable crowdsourcing so people from outside the organization can contribute with their ideas. The next thing it's going to do is try and help the employees behave differently. And now when I talk about behavior in this context, what I'm really talking about is how employees interact with each other. So for example, the organization may encourage employees to communicate more face-to-face rather than depend on emails, or it may encourage employees to debate more, to question the status quo, rather than just take things as they are. The third thing the organization is going to try and do is help employees think differently. So again, in this instance, the organization might say, let's think about failures differently. Let's look at them as stepping stones to success rather than as something negative. So if you think about it, and as we go through the lessons of history, let us see how history can help us understand all these three facets of change. When organizations drive change, the first thing they tend to do is focus on how employees work. That's relatively easy. It takes about 3 to 9 months depending on the scale of change. The next one is changing behaviors. That gets a little harder. That can take 2 years, 2 to 5 years. And then it is how employees think. That can take upwards of 5 years. But unless you change all these three facets, the change is not going to sustain. It's not going to stay. So as we go through lessons of history, what I'm going to try and share is how these lessons will help us drive change across all these three facets: how we work, how we behave, how we think. The first lesson of history: have an elegant vision. Now we all know we need a vision statement, nothing new about that. So what do we mean by the word elegant vision? Let's take a look at this statement. This statement, and you know, Omar talked about NASA and NASA's journey in the morning, so it's kind of coincidental. But if you think about this statement, this was a statement given by Kennedy in 1961 to the joint session of Congress. This nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely on Earth. Short, succinct, relevant to the times, difficult, but not impossible. But most important, it was inspiring and motivating. Actually, Kennedy gave this, when Kennedy actually made the statement, America was in a difficult spot. Russia was actually leading the space race, and America had just endured the Bay of Pigs fiasco. John F. Kennedy wanted to inspire the nation. When he said this statement, if you think of this vision statement, it was so appealing. It was something which would make a person jump out of his day-to-day life and want to be a part of this to make this vision come true. So the litmus test of a good vision statement is that it should be elegant. When I was looking at, it should be something that inspires, that stirs the emotions, that arouses the senses, that inspires and motivates. That's the only way you can change how people will behave and how they think. Another aspect of a good vision statement is that it should invoke a positive sentiment. So think about it. When you think about the vision statement that Kennedy gave, it was so appealing. In fact, it is appealing even today. The thought of going to the moon and coming back is so appealing. It was something that was going to change the way humans, the kind of things that humans do. There was a positive intent to it to do something very different. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it was simple. When I was thinking about vision statement, I actually went to the dictionary and I looked up the meaning of the word elegant. And when I was looking at the meaning of the word elegant, I was doing it from the context of science or business. So for example, an elegant scientific theory or an elegant business plan. And these are the three words I found: pleasing, ingenious, and simple. If you think about organizations that are successful, let's take a look at Google's vision statement. Google's vision statement is to organize the world's data in a manner that is accessible to everyone and useful. It's appealing, it's positive. Why? Because it wants to help humans and make the data accessible to everybody. It is pioneering, again very ambitious and simple. You also want a vision statement to have and evoke a positive sentiment. Human beings in general want to do the right thing and good things. So if a vision statement has a positive element to it, it can motivate even more. Take a look at Instagram's vision statement. Capture and share the world's moments. Appealing, we all want to share our moments with our families and friends. It was unique, and again, it is simple. So we all know we need a vision statement, but I think the important thing is make sure your vision statement is elegant. It has to be unique, it has to be different, it has to be ambitious and bold. Make sure it's very simple so that people can it resonates with people, and make sure it is appealing and it is positive. The next learning, make it personal. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. Everyone will recognize the picture of the person on the slide. It's Mahatma Gandhi. If you had seen images of Mahatma Gandhi, you'd probably always see him very simply clothed, probably a shawl wrapped around him, almost dressed like a peasant, a poor person. Mahatma Gandhi was a great leader. He led India to independence from the British rule. If you actually dig deeper into history, what you'll find is Mahatma Gandhi actually came from a very wealthy family. He was one of the few people from India in those days who went to the UK, studied there, and obtained a law degree from there. And just for a little bragging rights, actually it was my great-grandfather who helped Gandhi settle down in the UK when Gandhi went there for the first time. But, enough of bragging, I'll go back to change management. So, when Gandhi came back to India, he realized that he had to motivate the Indian masses. What he found was that the people he had to relate to were poor. They were peasants and simple people. He also realized that if he wanted to get rid of the British rule, he could not adopt a Western or a British lifestyle. So what did he do? He made it personal. He changed his lifestyle. He changed the way he dressed. And that's how he connected with the masses and motivated them to act. Think about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela led South Africa to independence. When Nelson Mandela started his political career, the first thing, he actually deeply believed that violence would help get rid of the rules of the white. Over the years, Mandela realized that violence would probably lead to chaos and would lead to the disintegration of South Africa. So he changed his mind and he became a proponent of nonviolence. But before that, he completely imbibed the philosophy on nonviolence and then espoused that cause with the South African people. Make it personal. When you are driving change, ask yourself 3 questions. Are you a true believer in the change, or are you doing this because your manager or your leader asked you to do that? Are you doing this change because you're looking forward to your next promotion, or you passionately want to do it? Have you imbibed the change? That's the second question to ask. Have you changed yourself? I'll give you a personal experience. I am a big student of Toyota. Bobby talked about it. I've been there at least 3 times. I was in GE previously and then I moved to Toyota. My philosophy on how to drive quality and continuous improvements has been largely influenced by Toyota. It has actually influenced me how I behave personally as well as professionally. When you're driving an agile transformation, for example, do you actually do experiments? Do you allow failures? So have you really internalized the change you're talking about? And thirdly, are you vested in the change? Will you stay long enough to make the change happen? Will you ask your colleagues and help your colleagues overcome the challenges of change? Because change can be hard. Will you help your colleagues overcome that? Or will you quickly move on to your next role? If you really want to drive change that sustains, that influences people, influences their behaviors, their thinking, the way they work, you need to make it personal. You need to be the person who first demonstrates the change. Be like an explorer. Cross the river by feeling the stones. But before I go ahead, do you recognize this person on the slide? How many of you do? Can I have a show of hands? Very few. All right, so let me talk about this person. This person is Deng Xiaoping. He's the architect of modern China. 50, 60 years ago, China was a rather underdeveloped country. It believed in the principles of communism and socialism. Poverty and hunger were widespread. When Deng Xiaoping took over, he actually wanted to change the country to a capitalist economy. And one would think that if you're the ruler of China, you have so much power and you could do anything you want. Not really true. If you go into history, you will find that it was very challenging for Deng Xiaoping. And the reason it was very challenging was Deng Xiaoping himself didn't know how a capitalist economy worked. He was surrounded by leaders who believed in the communist philosophy. So what did he do? He went abroad, he went to Western nations, visited over there and studied how capitalism works. He went to universities, he went to factories to see how science, technology and education can help an economy. He asked his fellow leaders to go and see for themselves how Western countries operate. He came back and he espoused the cause of experimentation. He encouraged the Chinese population to try out something small, see how it's working. He allowed them to fail and said we will learn from those failures. There's a very famous saying by Deng Xiaoping saying, some people will get rich fast. What he meant by that is, we are going to start this capitalist economy in certain parts of China. We'll experiment and learn from there. He also studied how Russia was going through its transformation. So Russia was going through its own transformation at that time. And what Russia did was allowed economic freedom and political freedom. And over a period of time, Russia broke into different countries. Deng Xiaoping did not want that for China, so he set boundaries. He said, China will have economic freedom, but it will not have political freedom, and that is true even today. So when you are driving change, be like an explorer. Cross the river, which means go through your transformation by feeling the stones, which means make sure you're grounded to reality. Go to the frontline staff, go to the trenches, go to the Gemba, and see what challenges your teammates are facing, and make sure that you stay true to your destination, but you pivot your approach and path based on the feedback you're getting. Be like an explorer. An explorer has his destination site. He has a plan. But as he traverses the environment, he may change plans to make sure that it's safe to reach the destination. Make sure that you know your boundaries. Do not try to do everything in one go. Make sure you have pilot, get some successes, get some wins, get some learnings, and then go full speed ahead and take it across the organization. So be like an explorer. Build institutions. How many of you recognize this gentleman? Show of hands. All right, you guys need to read your history books, come on. All right, so this gentleman is Lee Yuan Kyu. He was the person who led Singapore to independence and has made it a very strong nation today. Singapore is a small nation in Asia. It is 2/3 the size of New York. Singapore got freedom twice, once from the British and once from Malaysia. When Singapore got freedom, it was a poor country and it was made up of a diaspora of people from different ethnic backgrounds. Singapore could have easily disintegrated into ethnic conflicts and chaos, but Lee Yuan Kyu had the vision that he wanted to make Singapore the finance capital of Asia. He wanted Singapore to become the gateway of Asia. So when Westerners came to invest in Asia, they would first come to Singapore and invest through Singapore. But to do this, Lee Yuan Kyu realized that he needed to build the institutions. The first thing he realized that he needed to have the organizing principle of meritocracy. He needed to make sure that even in the government and even in bureaucrats, leave alone the private sector, people would be selected and would grow based on their merits. So that's what he made the organizing principle. The second thing he realized is if banks and financial institutions had to come to Singapore, Singapore had to be corruption-free. And that's hard in Asia. It's a big issue in most Asian countries. So Lee Yuan Kyu said the rule of law and order will prevail and made sure it was a corruption-free country. The third thing he realized is that again, if these organizations, these banks came to Singapore, it needed a population, a skilled workforce so that it had a good, healthy talent pool to recruit from. So Lee Yuan Kyu went and built the educational institutions. Even to this day, Singapore offers a very good educational system so that the population of Singapore was skilled. He also realized that if Singaporeans had to focus on the vision he had and help build that vision, they had to stop worrying about the basics of living. So he overhauled the healthcare system, the housing system, so that Singaporeans could take care of the basics and focus on the vision he had. So when you're driving transformation, think about how to sustain change. You have to have the organizing principles, the policies, the systems, the frameworks to ensure that that change can stick and sustain. Most important, think about reskilling your workforce. Are you making sure that they're educated? And the skill sets could be anything. It could be leadership skills, it could be technical skills, it could be finance skills, it could be anything, depending on the nature of change you're driving. So make sure you're building institutions to sustain that change. Remember, changing how people behave and think take multiple years. So unless you're thinking of sustaining the change with policies, systems, and frameworks, that change will soon dissipate. Build bridges. Lincoln said it right. And so did Thatcher. When the Cold War came to an end, Reagan was given a lot of credit for bringing down the Iron Curtain. But actually, Reagan could not have been successful if he didn't have a very strong alliance with Margaret Thatcher. Together, two of them put enough pressure on Russia to make sure that the Cold War came to an end. But again, if you dig deeper into history, what you will find is that the two of them worked closely with Gorbachev and kept the lines of communication open with Gorbachev. There's a very famous saying where Margaret Thatcher says, "I can work with Gorbachev," who was then the premier of Russia. And together they worked together to bring the Cold War down in a peaceful way without any chaos across the world. Reagan and Thatcher also worked with the Pope. The Pope has been largely credited to actually give their energy to the uprising in Poland to bring democracy to Poland. So make sure when you're driving change, you're building bridges, you're making allies. You will always have people who object to your change. have empathy, understand why, keep your lines of communication open. I can give you a personal example. There was one person when we were driving Agile transformation, deep believer in waterfall, and she was an important person in the organization. We went through Agile training together, we went and saw best practices. Over a period of time, she has changed, and today is one of the biggest advocates of Agile in my organization. So as Thatcher said, keep your lines of communication open because you do not know when they become your friends. Bring out the masses. How many of you recognize this person? All right, at least some hands went up. So this is Rosa Parks. She has been largely credited with the Montgomery bus boycott. In December 1955, Rosa Parks was sitting in a public bus. A white person came up to her and told her to get up and go elsewhere in the bus. In 1955, the public transportation in Montgomery had segregated seating arrangements, so there were places for whites and non-whites. Rosa Parks refused to get up. 4 days later, all the non-whites in Montgomery, Alabama started boycotting the public transportation system. They did this for 381 days, and finally, the law struck down and said that segregation of seating in the public transportation system in Montgomery was illegal and seating was integrated. The Montgomery bus boycott was a seminal event in the civil rights movement in America. A lot of credit was given to Rosa Parks, but again, if you dig deeper into history, you find that in March 1955 and also in October 1955, there were two separate individuals who refused to give up their seats to the white person. But nothing happened when those two people did that, but a big movement happened when Rosa Parks did that. Why? Because Rosa Parks was a connector. She was networked into the community. She was already very active with the civil rights movement. She was well respected in the community, so when she decided to create a movement, the masses followed. When you are driving your change, look for those connectors in the organization. When I'm talking of connectors, who are these people in your company? These are subject matter experts. These are people who have been in the organization for a long time. These are people who know the organization very well, they know the system very well, they are the go-to people for advice. Reach out to them. These are probably people who are those jovial, genial guys who go out for a beer with their fellow colleagues many a times. Reach out to them, influence them, make them your early adopters of change. I have personally done this millions of times. I cannot influence everyone, I'm not so great. But I know if I work with people who have large influence in the organization, I can help bring out the masses. Make sure you make heroes of early adopters. Make sure that they become famous in the organization when they are adopting your change. Create communities. We create things like Scrum Master communities, Product Manager communities. And what happens in those communities is laggards of change, people who are not adopting the change, get influenced by the early adopters in a very safe, informal environment. Never underestimate the power of peer influence. Make sure you go to best practice sharing sessions. We routinely in my organization go and see other companies who do things better than us. It is one thing when you say something, it is another thing when your colleagues see it firsthand. So make sure when you're driving change, it is not a top-down mandated change, but it's a bottoms-up movement. That's the only way you can make employees work differently, behave differently, think differently. Bring out the masses. Be a servant leader. Who better a person than Nelson Mandela? When Nelson Mandela took over as the Prime Minister of South Africa and he went to work, he found he was surrounded by white bureaucrats. They had packed up all their stuff, they were ready to leave, knowing fully well Mandela is going to fire them. And he went up to them and said, I do not know anything about running a government. I need you to stay and help me. Be humble. Be authentic. Be compassionate. When you're a servant leader, your job is not just to teach, but also to learn. Make sure you're supporting people as they go through this change and this transition. It's not easy. It's different when you are driving it. It's different when somebody else is being told what to do. So make sure you're listening to people and supporting them. Most important, earn the trust. Don't forget the humor. Lincoln was known to disarm people with his humor, especially when he was in a tough spot. Humor is one of the best ingredients of survival. Use humor, guys, because change is hard, and actually levity is sometimes the best policy. It lightens up moments, it makes difficult spots easy, it helps you communicate and link up with people. And actually relax and enjoy, because just when you think you've finished change, some new change is going to come at you. So make sure you're enjoying the journey. As we think about this is the end of my presentation. I hope that I have tried to help you think about change differently. These are just practical nuggets of wisdom. Think about it when you're driving change. Make sure you have an elegant vision, something that is different, bold, passionate, something that really inspires and motivates people. I'll give you another example. When we are driving an agile transformation, we don't call it an agile transformation. We say it's building software users love, because that's what people want to do. It's positive, it evokes something good. Make sure that you make it personal. You imbibe the change and you demonstrate the change with your own behaviors and words. Make sure you're making allies. You're bringing out the masses and making a bottoms-up movement. Do not forget to build the institutions, the systems, and the policies and the frameworks to sustain the change. And be a servant leader and enjoy the journey. Thank you.